This video will be concerned with types of organizations. The class is concerned more specifically with different types of organizations, the business purposes, the economic sector, and differing aims. And we want to go through these throughout the rest of the slides. We'll start by looking at the public sector organizations. Now, governments run organizations such as government departments and organizations funded by the government. The purpose is to provide a public service. Now, some of the products or services supplied by the government may not be supplied by the private sector, or not easily supplied by the private sector. For example, street lighting. But it's very difficult to imagine the private sector providing street lighting, because it would be difficult to get payment for a start and controlling who's using the street lights and who's not using them. So sometimes we talk about the public sector supplying products such as that, supplying the armed forces or supplying law and order. It does mean, of course, that many products supplied by the public sector are open to debate. They could be supplied by the private sector, and there's always a debate between what the public sector should provide and what it shouldn't. Examples of the type of services supplied by the public sector in the UK in particular is the NHS, the National Health Service, and the then for the collection of taxes, the HMRC. Then we have education, prison services, social security benefits, public corporations such as the Royal Mail or the BBC. So there are many services in the UK provided by the government. Now, some people would want to see that extended, and the government perhaps should control the railways or control some other aspect of transport or of public life. Others again would say the government's supplying too much and should cut back, and that's the nature of political debate. But whatever that debate is, or wherever it goes, the fact is that we can identify some products and services supplied by the public sector. Local authorities in the UK also, but this also applies in many other countries. But in the UK we have local authorities. These are like smaller versions of the government, looking after local areas, looking after particular cities or particular regions. And these local authorities provide services for the local community. For example, schools, environmental health, road maintenance, the fire service, refuge collection, economic development, recreation and tourism, social services, police, the magistrates' courts and probation service, libraries, and I'm sure there are others. So we can see that the public sector reaches deep into our lives, our daily lives, or at least those of us who live in the UK. But this is also a feature of many other countries. It may not be to the same extent, or indeed it may be even more than in the UK. Depends. Now, the private sector organizations. Well, this is concerned with private business owned by private individuals. The purpose of this sector is to, let's say, maximize profits and survival. I'm not happy about the term to maximize profits. A lot of textbooks tend to say that the purpose of the private sector is to maximize profits. In fact, many companies don't know about maximizing profits. The very nature of their product and their services means it's very difficult for them to even estimate what the maximum profits are, or what they would have to do to maximize profits. Many companies instead try to get a good rate of return, however that's defined. And this idea of maximizing profits is a nice theoretical concept. If you like, it's a theoretical benchmark through which we can assess economic efficiency. But it doesn't mean that companies in practice maximize profits, or for that matter, maximize anything. They simply make enough to keep their shareholders happy, to enable themselves to continue to function and to invest and to innovate and supply the market and to continue. So maximizing profits, it's a good, interesting model in economic theory, but it may not apply in practice that much. The private sector businesses are categorized as sole traders, limited companies and partnerships. Generally speaking, that's the way we divide it up. Of course, there are other classifications we could insert here and be slightly more elaborate. We have private limited companies and we have public limited companies, and the partnerships could be limited or unlimited, and so there are different types of divisions we can imagine under this heading. But as a good starting point, just take the three of them. We have sole traders, a single person running a small business, perhaps supplying local services in the community, a local plumber or electrician supplying his or her services to the local community. That's a sole trader. They get called out to do a job and they get paid. That's their business. Limited companies, by contrast, are legal entities. They're registered with Companies House as legal entities. And there will be shareholders and directors of the company. And they will oversee the direction in which the company operates. Partnerships, generally speaking, are not limited. And by limited, I mean here that if the company were to fail, the most that the shareholders could lose is what they invested in the company. They can't lose their houses or their personal wealth. They only lose what they invested in the business, what they put into the business. And that's what I mean by limited liability. Partnerships may be unlimited. So if the partnership gets into trouble, financial trouble, then their personal assets may be used to pay off their debts, pay off the debts of the partnership. But there are three types, that's the point, three types of private sector businesses we can identify. If we want to be more elaborate, we can go and break these up into public companies, private companies, limited partnerships, unlimited partnerships, and so on. Examples of these are, examples are all over the place, but Amazon, iPhone, Samsung, Microsoft, Virgin, Walmart, eBay, Google, Tesco, Asda, it goes on, and it would be impossible to, in a session such as this, to itemize all the companies that we can imagine. It's just an enormous list. But this is what we mean by private sector. They're owned by individuals. They're not owned by the taxpayer. They're not run on behalf of the people of the country. They're not like public service provision. Now, the voluntary sector organizations, these are also known as not-for-profit organizations because the key focus is on using their income to provide a service to those in need. These may be charities, for example, or organizations set up to help in a particular way, help the homeless or help people in need. So whatever the business generates, if it generates a profit, it's not really a profit. It goes back into that organization and it's then distributed out to those in need. So some of these can be run as commercial organizations, and they would to us look like commercial organizations, but in fact the surplus that they generate is used for good purposes. This sector tends to be registered as a charity, as I said, or it could be a trust or limited by guarantee. These are other forms of organisation, legal organisation, that may constitute the voluntary sector. They do not make profit. Any surplus is reinvested back into developing the cause. So developing some facility for those in need, operating perhaps houses for the homeless, or operating food banks, or operating trying to help people who are genuinely in need. And this would be the voluntary sector. Examples include Oxfam, Red Cross, Cancer Research, WaterAid. There are many other charities, hundreds and hundreds. And it may be worth just going online and just looking at the range of charities that exist. Now, differing aims. Well, businesses operate in the private, public and voluntary sectors and have different aims and objectives. It almost goes without saying. In the private sector, the aims will be survival of the business and a return on the investment for the shareholders. In the public sector, it will be the provision of services. They will have a proviso that the services should be provided efficiently. And in the voluntary sector, as we've just seen, it'll be to generate a surplus which goes to some good cause. So they have differing aims. Now, the private sector aims, well, survival and growth. As I said, a business can begin to plan growth once it has passed the survival stage. Businesses can then set a growth objective. For example, make a profit. For example, expanding the business. So in the private sector, it may be survival and growth. That's what drives the private sector, to try and get the business to survive, to pay salaries, pay the bills, and at the same time to generate a surplus, give a return to the investors, and finance further development. Business objectives are a set of realistic goals to increase productivity and sales. They must be realistic. If they're not realistic, they will not be achieved. So they're trying to increase productivity and sales. Now, the public sector aims, well, providing a public service which provide a need to the local community, and this is done at the national level. For example, local authorities, the BBC, broadcasts, and so on. So the public sector aims is to provide a public service, and this is to meet a need within the community. So the BBC, for example, is financed out of a BBC license, and people who receive the BBC must pay that license. Local authorities may provide schools, libraries, so people are able to borrow books and perhaps not have to pay. It's a public library. Perhaps those people could not afford to buy the books or get the books in any other way. So it's a public sector. It's trying to help the community. Limiting cost, resources, and delivering efficient services. Although the public sector is providing all of these services, it does try to be efficient. It does try to do this in a way that minimizes waste. So it tries to cut costs and deliver an efficient service. It also tries to have good quality standards and to demonstrate the quality of the service provided. It's not just good enough to provide something in the public sector. It must provide something of quality, something that is fit for purpose, something which will be used and which will show that the public sector is not just efficient, but it's spending its resources wisely to get good products which will go into the community. The voluntary sector aims, well, raise money through government funding and donations to purchase equipment or services for a good cause. So they will try to raise funds in a variety of ways by trying to get donations, by making people aware of what they're doing, by perhaps advertising and getting the word around that they are trying to provide this particular service that meets this particular need. In the UK, a lot is raised for international disasters that unfortunately happen. It could be torrential rain causes flooding in some country, and UK charities step up and try to provide services to the people who are affected. But they also try to provide services to the people living in the UK as well, who may also be hit by disasters of one type or another. Raise awareness of current issues and the purpose of the cause or the charity. Sometimes people are not aware of the pressing need for some issues, for something to be done. We know that there's a water shortage in the world, but in many countries we don't feel that. We see the rain, and we know there's water at the end of the tap, which we just turn on, and we can have a shower, and we have plenty of water. At least that's what it appears. But in some countries there is no water and people are dying. So it is for the voluntary sector to make us aware that this is happening, to try and raise resources to try and help those people. Increase surplus to reinvest back into further developing the cause. They try to generate a surplus. They don't necessarily distribute all they receive in. They try to look at what they receive in and see what is the wisest way to spend it. And that may mean making capital investments, buying equipment, which may be expensive, to send to disaster areas, or to help, if it's a voluntary sector, providing housing for homeless people in the UK. What sort of housing and what needs to be done, and perhaps it's buying equipment and buying skilled workers who will enter premises and make the premises fit to live in. So they're trying to take the surplus and use it in that way. Now, business purpose. Well, the purpose of a business is to satisfy a customer-client need. Business only exists if there is a demand for the product or the service. Now, this is quite a big statement, and those of you who have an interest in economics will be particularly interested in the way that is worded, because the purpose of a business is to satisfy customer-client need. Well, you could say the purpose of the business is to get a return on the investment. I mean, that's why it was set up in the first place. If investors can get X% in the bank on their capital, on their money, and they can get X plus Y% by investing in a business, albeit a riskier venture, nonetheless, they may be attracted into investing in the business, and they'll want a return on their investment. Now, the way to get the return on the investment is to satisfy customer client need, because satisfying the customer client need means that there will be a demand for the product and a repeat demand for the product. So maybe to say that the purpose of a business is to satisfy a customer client need, that may not be exactly accurate. It may be the purpose of the business is to generate a return on the investment. And the way that's done is by providing a product which is good quality, which is seen as good value for money, and it enhances the reputation of the business. There's good follow-up, good after-sales service, so the customer is happy with the product, and that means the business is more sustainable. So we take product service as our first heading. What need does it satisfy is the next question, and the type of business. Now, let's say we have online movies. That's the product or service. What need does it satisfy? Well, entertainment. That's what they do. Online films entertain us. The type of business? Well, Amazon Prime, Netflix, and there are probably others. So we can identify businesses under these headings. Hot beverages. Sorry. What need does it satisfy? Well, socialization, relaxing, a pleasant drink, perhaps mid-morning or in the afternoon. So socialization and relaxing. Who provides it? Well, Costa, Starbucks, and there are many others. So we can identify the type of business. Shoes as a product. What need does it satisfy? Comfort, fashion. Who supplies it? Well, Clark's, but again there are others. So we can identify business purpose and classify businesses under these type of headings. Now, the economic sector, well, most businesses are involved in one or all of the following sectors. The primary sector. Well, the primary sector, this sector involves the extraction of raw materials, the primary product. Business types include agriculture, raw cocoa, coffee beans, farming, mining. It's the extractive sector. Forestry, fishing. These are all the primary sectors, the primary sector. This is where, if you like, the raw materials comes from. This is where we can't get anything more basic than this. This is what nature provides. It's the primary sector. Well, taking the products of the primary sector, taking the raw materials, in other words, from the primary sector, to finished or part finished goods. For example, preparing, cleaning, packaging of coffee beans ready for consumption. That would be the secondary sector. So we take wood from the forest, that's primary, and we turn it into furniture. That's secondary sector. The third type is called, surprisingly enough, the tertiary sector. Delivery of finished goods to the end consumer. Delivery to shops, restaurants, cafes. Another element includes advertising and marketing of finished goods. The tertiary sector is also known as the service sector. So education is in the tertiary sector. It doesn't make something, and it's not involved in extracting anything from nature. So it's not primary, it's not secondary, it's the tertiary. Education is in the tertiary sector. So also is entertainment, cinemas, television production, many sporting events and professional sports people. These are in the tertiary sector. So it's at the the very, in a sense, the top of the tree. This is the sector that in which we get the services in restaurants. We enjoy the finished products from the secondary sector, and we get to live our lives in the tertiary sector. Now the economic sector, well, primary, let's say coffee farming. Let's just take that as an example. Secondary would be, as I said, preparing, cleaning, packaging of coffee beans. So it's the primary is collecting the coffee beans, and the second one is preparing and cleaning and packaging of coffee beans. It's if you like, it's an industrial process. It's the secondary sector. And the tertiary sector is cafes serving hot beverages, supermarkets selling coffee beans. That's the tertiary sector. That's the one at the top. So this is our talk about types of organizations and the way in which we can look at the objectives and the types of organizations that we meet, from the public, the private, the voluntary, and the types of sectors that we can also classify. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.